President Kennedy died.
U.S. base on Cuba, the American sends...
But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop.
Freedom! Freedom! Between fellow human beings.
Vietnam is all of these things.
This is what the war in Vietnam is all about.
Okay.
I think it's great. I think it's really borderline sport and marches like this.
Turn on, tune in, drop out.
Citizens, then we urge you to take records, pictures, and prove it.
I don't believe you. Television is more popular than Jesus.
And then number two.
I tried to fit the theme of late 60s, early 70s kind of vibe here. I wouldn't say it was very successful. It's not looking good right now, but I tried. Secondly, we're back. If you didn't know, there's actually a part 1 that I did with the first half of the Beatles' career. I'll be basically picking up this video from there. Going to be crazy. I'm very excited to go over it with you all. As always, your likes and subscribes would be appreciated, so like and subscribe if you want to. Comment down below, tell me what you think of this video. Okay, I will not take up any more of your time. Ladies, gentlemen, non-binaries, this is part 2 of my Beatles Deep Dive. Things are very different from where we last left off. The release of Rubber Soul marked a lot of positive change within the group's sound and creative endeavors, but a slew of negatives would shortly follow. As beautiful and as brilliant of an album as Rubber Soul is, this was the first recording session where some very minor cracks within the band began to show. One of the recording engineers on the album, Norman Smith, actually talked about how Paul and John specifically would clash creatively, how Paul was usually very controlling over George and his ideas. We have 2 singles off the bat that accompanied Rubber Soul but were not part of the album, We Can Work It Out and Day Tripper. We Can Work It Out is one of those songs that I don't go out of my way to listen to, honestly, but when it comes on, I do enjoy it. The lyrics are just very charming, and John and Paul's harmonies on the bridge are lovely. Day Tripper, on the other hand, I am to this day incredibly beyond obsessed with this song. Like the cool guitar riffs throughout and the super smooth intro, the harmonies during the chorus, the lyrics. It's very obviously about a loose romantic interest. I just love how cool this song is. It's definitely a major favorite of mine. Now we're heading into 1966. The facade of the perfectly well-kept image of the band's reputation would bit by bit begin to fall apart around this time. The Beatles did actually take a 3-month break before recording again in April of 1966. However, in June of 1966, Capitol Records would release another LP compilation for the US titled Yesterday and Today, in which the album's cover shows the band holding mutilated baby dolls with guts spilling out. There's quite a bit to unpack here, I would say. Known as the Butcher cover, Robert Whittaker, who photographed this cover along with a bunch of other bizarre photos of the band, said that the overall photo shoot was a critique on the over-worshipping of the Beatles and their crazy fan base at the time. It was really just a way to completely shake up the perfect pop image. However, the boys themselves say that the photo was a statement against the Vietnam War, and then the audiences who actually bought the album interpreted it as a protest against Capitol Records and the quote-unquote butchering of these exact LPs in an attempt to create a greater profit in the United States. All of these explanations are pretty obsolete because the cover would be widely criticized and shunned for its graphic visuals. The backlash would end up leading to the immediate ban of the album cover and having to be replaced with a more PG, family-friendly cover. This was known as Operation Retrieve, which wound up costing Capitol Records $2.3 million. However, not all of the records could be retrieved, so they literally just straight up had to paste the new cover on the old one, meaning that to this day, some of these records actually are pretty valuable. All you have to do is just peel the new cover away and there may or may not be mutilated babies with smiling Beatles right underneath it. So not even a month later, even more controversy would follow up on the band. Right after they just got out of the mutilated baby controversy, the Beatles would actually have a tour in Asia, including the Philippines, where the band was invited to a breakfast reception at the presidential palace by the First Lady, Imelda Marcos. However, Brian Epstein declined on behalf of the band, which was considered to be very insulting. I cannot reinforce that enough. It's very insulting to the presidential family, leading to riots and hostility towards the band during their stay, forcing them to literally escape the country and cancel the show. This controversy took a really big toll on them and their desires to keep touring, as the public would grow much more hostile towards the boys as more and more controversies would just pile up on them. In general, touring was just not really enjoyable for them at all. John hated that they couldn't even hear themselves play live. George hated the copious amount of unwanted attention that they would constantly get. But it seems that all of this pressure, endangerment, and hatred towards touring would just reach an absolute boiling point when in August of 1966, around the same time their next album would release, a wee little old comment by John would make the rounds in the States.
Foreign singers, like it's a very basic of our existence, the God-fearing, patriotic souvenirs of the pickup and we urge you to take your Beatles record.
Yeah, needless to say, people were not pleased with that comment. Specifically, the Bible Belt region in the United States, which consists of a multitude of southern states that are very religious, who all were incredibly violent and hostile towards the band after this comment, holding protests which involved large bonfires and the burning of the band's records. I mean, even the Vatican was out here holding protests too. It wasn't just the United States. Spanish and Dutch stations would also not play their music. Even South Africa would ban their music as well. Funny enough, the UK really could have cared less about this comment. It was obviously a joke. We obviously didn't think that the band was bigger than Jesus, but alas, that was the time they were living in, so shit got way out of hand. This is actually, in a way, the first example of a popular celebrity being canceled. This entire situation was really just the final nail in the coffin, and the Beatles had just about enough of touring and just pandering to the public in general. So at the end of August of 1966, the band would embark on their final tour together, with their final concert being at Candlestick Park in San Francisco. And then, well, from that point onwards, they'd put all their time and effort into the studio and experiment without pressure from the public and make some of the most celebrated, high quality, highly cherished albums of all time. The band would actually release their 7th studio album and by far their most experimental, Revolver. Accompanied by 2 non-singles, Paperback Writer and Rain, we have entered the realm of real f***ing shit. The jump in creativity from Rubber Soul to Revolver is actually crazy. They even got rid of traditional photographic album covers for a more avant-garde, artistic collage of their faces. The band leaned heavily into psychedelic rock here, and the album itself would be incredibly influential in the now extremely prevalent counterculture movement, as it would explore interests in LSD, Eastern philosophies, and avant-garde ideologies. And without the pressure of having to perform these songs live, they went crazy on the audio and double tracking. Let's talk about Paperback Writer. It's a great single. That's really all I have right now to say. It's very experimental and weird, and the lyrics are very cool. Rain, the next single, takes the experimental sounds even further, adding even more psychedelic aspects into this song, with John's voice sounding weird and otherworldly. Rain is also incredibly good as well, in my opinion. As for the album Revolver, things open up with Taxman, written and sung by the George Harrison. He locked the in with this one. It is considered to be one of their first political songs, criticizing the tax system in the UK. The lyrics are fantastic, and the fact George wrote this is wild. Eleanor Rigby. That's all I have to say. This is heavenly, honestly. The lyrics are dark as Paul's vocals are amazing. This is literally a top 5 for me, point blank. Don't hold it against me if I don't put this in the top 5 though. I'm Only Sleeping is weird and psychedelic, and I'm obsessed. Love You Too is another George song, and it's really his first time leaning into Indian Hindu inspired music. Another wacky song, criminally underrated in my opinion. I love Here, There, and Everywhere. Paul is still able to lock the in when it comes to love songs, and this is by far one of, if not his absolute best one, honestly. Yellow Submarine, literally a classic. Unironically, the most widely known song from this album. Ringo was in his bag with this one, not even gonna lie. Even though technically Paul and John wrote it, Ringo still ate though. Fun fact, actually, a bunch of their friends served as background vocals during the chorus and during the parts with the clinking glasses and the chattering, including Patty Boyd, Brian Jones from the Rolling Stones, Marianne Faithfull, who is a popular English rock singer, and even George Martin contributed to the backing vocals. She Said is one of the more simple, forgettable songs, honestly, of the album. Good Day Sunshine, I'm surprisingly not a big fan of, actually. I mean, it's not a bad song or anything, but it's a bit too poppy sounding for me. And Your Bird Can Sing is criminally underrated. You all know I love a good harmony. For No One is also a simple love song, but it works so well for some reason. I don't know if this is controversial, but I do not like Dr. Robert. Sorry to say, but like, what the fuck is this even about? I Want to Tell You is the third, yeah, that's right, third George Harrison song, and I am absolutely seated for it. The harmonies are good, and George sounds alright. Got to Get You Into My Life is just so nice and positive. The horns and the tambourines just give it such a nice, uplifting, and fun vibe to it. Paul also just sounds great here. Then we get to the closing song, Tomorrow Never Knows. Crazy. This is one of their most insane songs like ever. It literally takes the essence of LSD, psychedelia, avant-garde art, and just goes to otherworldly lengths with it. This is far and away the best song they've ever created up to this point. It is just a masterpiece. So if you can't tell, I really love Revolver. What a mind-blowing, insane album. The change, the innovation, absolutely insane. Fantastic album. Go listen to it. Thank you. Picture yourself in a boat on the river. Revolver ended up being an outstanding leap forward artistically for the group, receiving high praise from critics and setting the groundwork for more experimental, artistically advanced bodies of work to come. And with the group finally being done and over with live performances, the studio was their playground. However, the outside world was not experiencing these same freedoms, as the Vietnam War continued to wage on, becoming incredibly unpopular with the West, especially in the United States. Many baby boomers who were the ones fighting this war did not see a reason to continue fighting, and with the rise of media and technology that showed the true horrors and extent of destruction within Vietnam due to the war, disdain was widespread and anti-war sentiment gave way to massive demonstrations, usually peaceful, typical Americanized ways of living at the time were widely rejected. All of this and more would cause a counterculture explosion, not just in the States or in the UK, but quite literally throughout the world as well, from Argentina to Australia to Czechoslovakia to Mexico. Music was more important and influential than ever during this time, especially as more bands began to experiment with psychedelic sounds, creating distorted sounds with audio and their own instruments. There was such a massive emphasis on freedom of expression during this time. There is no greater example of the vibes speaking was a massive hub for nonconformists during this time already, so it's no surprise that a majority of youth flocked to the city. During the summer of 1967, there were constant festivals with rock bands, lots of drugs flowing around, peaceful protests against the Vietnam War, and lots of hippies. About 100,000 people would stay in the Haight-Ashbury district for the summer, and it just became a massive phenomenon. But again, music was huge. And at the beginning of May of 1967, quite literally at the beginning of the Summer of Love, the Beatles would release Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. This is one of their most, if not the most recognizable, celebrated album in the history of music. It just has such a massive influence on pop culture and how people record albums now to this day even. Sgt. Pepper's is a phenomenal album. It completely charges head on into psychedelic rock. It's colorful, it's avant-garde, it's a lyrical masterpiece, one of the first ever concept albums. It only further fueled the Summer of Love and the counterculture movements as well. The Beatles were just quite simply in their bag this era. There were actually a bunch of non-album singles released, starting with the ever so iconic, I adore this song, Strawberry Fields Forever, probably the most psychedelic rock the band will ever get. It is so beyond weird, the composition is crazy, the lyrics are all over the place, and I love it. This song just makes it feel like you're levitating. Fantastic song, one of my all-time faves. Penny Lane gets such an emotional reaction out of me for some reason. It's just so f***ing cute and wholesome, and the lyrics tell such a vivid story and describe the actual Penny Lane so nicely. Another all-time fave for sure. Then finally we have All You Need Is the Love, which is for sure the most Summer of Love song to ever love. Like, holy shit, was it basically made for this event. It actually literally came out right at the peak of the Summer of Love in July of 1967, so it obviously became massively popular and honestly served as a bit of an anthem for that summer. They also performed this song a week before on live TV to about 350 million viewers on Our World, which was pretty major. The song itself is just nice, positive vibes, good message, good lyrics. It's way too overplayed for me, but I mean, it's good. So All You Need Is Love, yet I have absolutely none of it. Moving on down to the masterpiece of an album itself. The album, as I said before, is actually a concept album, one of the first of its kind. Sgt. Pepper's Band is supposed to be the alter ego of the Beatles themselves that they created, and the entire album is basically one big live performance as a way for the band to perform without actually performing. Let's just jump right the f into it because we've got the intro of the album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. What a way to start your album. This is such a loud, energetic, fun introduction into the album. In my opinion, this is arguably my favorite opening track of any of their albums. I just love that booming guitar intro, and Paul's voice sounds awesome. They ate with this, with a little help from my friends is Ringo's best song, Point Blank. Ringo is very visibly improving vocally and he sounds great. The lyrics are so nice and cute. Ringo ate this and I don't want to hear nothing else. Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds is trippy as unironically also has the acronym LSD. I f***ing loved this song though. One of John's most well-known, well-written, composed songs. Too good. Getting Better I actually heard through the Cat in the Hat movie when they went through that cleaning montage at the end. It's yet another banger, however, until they start talking about the wife beating, which Fixing a Hole is pretty underrated in my opinion. Another one of my faves here. It talks about the struggles of dealing with psychotic fans, essentially, and the struggle of finding privacy. She's leaving home and being for the benefit of Mr. Kite. Gotta admit, are not my absolute faves here. I'm not a massive fan of either of them, not gonna lie. Both of these songs just seem more like short stories or poetry, which isn't bad by any means, but it doesn't really entirely translate into a concrete song. Within You and Without You is by George Harrison. It is his only song on the album, however, so justice for George, I will say that Day and Night. I actually really like this a lot. I could be biased because it's George Harrison, but the Eastern Asian music influence is extremely prominent here. The lyrics are super philosophical. It's a pretty trippy song, and I mean, I love their trippy shit, so this is a pretty good song in my opinion. I f***ing love When I'm 64. I just also love when Paul applies his classical music background to his songs, and When I'm 64 is one of his best examples of doing just that. About growing old with someone. It's just a cozy, comforting song. I love it. Paul actually wrote this song when he was just 14 years old, which is absolutely insane to me. Lovely Rita is another underrated song in my opinion. Pretty sure I'm alone in that regard, however. But there's just something so fun and infectiously catchy about Lovely Rita. Plus those harmonies during the chorus. I actually really don't like Good Morning at all. Sorry to say, it's just incredibly annoying to me. I don't with those animal noises in the background. I don't like John's voice here. This is probably my least favorite song on the album. Then there's the reprise of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. A good chunk of people actually say they prefer this over the intro, but I completely disagree. I think the intro is far more energetic and electric. The reprise is still pretty good though. I believe there's still one more song left. A Day in the Life, not to be confused with In My Life, is quite simply a masterpiece. It comprises of a short song from John and a short song from Paul mashed together to create, well, this. It really is a massive testament and honestly a celebration of the creative strides and improvements that the band has gone through since their formation to get to this point. You literally feel like dying in the best way possible, of course. I mean, the orchestra playing all these random notes, John's verse, it is so unbelievably haunting. This very well might be my favorite song by the Beatles ever. I cannot praise this song enough. I adore it. But yeah, that was Sgt. Pepper's. I can't even imagine how mind-blowing it was to listen to such an advanced album during the 60s. Even commercially, this album did incredibly well. Also earning the Beatles the first ever Album of the Year award for a rock album. One of the best-selling albums of all time. I mean, the praise you could give, it's endless. Listen to this album in full, and I promise you, you will not regret it. Chaos, destruction, pain, suffering. By the sound of it, it appears we have reached the Magical Mystery Tour. We do start off on a pretty good note. I mean, the popularity of Sgt. Pepper's continues to rage on well into the summer of love, with the release of All You Need Is Love, further solidifying the Beatles as icons during the counterculture movement. They even began plans for 2 films, one for TV and the other a feature-length film. Then in comes oh god, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. He would host his retreats worldwide, especially throughout India, teaching his practices of transcendental meditation. The band had met him and grown immediately interested in his practices and planned a trip to Bangor in North Wales, where the Maharishi was hosting one of his retreats. However, they got a phone call from their assistant manager letting them know that their manager, Brian Epstein, had died. This was massive. I cannot stress just how significant and impactful this death was to the band and how surprising it was. Up until that point, Brian really was the glue holding the band together. He took care of all of their responsibilities, kept them on track when making albums or doing promotional touring. He was essentially a parental figure for them.
John, where would you be today without Mr. Epstein?
I don't know.
You've no idea what your plans are for tomorrow?
No, we'd just go and find out, and just have to play everything by ear.
So with Brian's death, the band was almost immediately left to fend for themselves, as the responsibilities held by Brian were now in the hands of the band. The responsibility of completing these next two film projects, along with promotional responsibilities and recording responsibilities, were all in the hands of the Beatles. The recording of the Magical Mystery Tour album and the filming of its accompanying movie was a complete mess. Filming and production for the Magical Mystery Tour was headed by Paul. However, without Brian, the band was completely undisciplined and had no concrete idea on what the album and what the movie were going to turn out like. They were also constantly high on LSD here, which did not help their concentration. Even George Martin, their producer, had to distance himself from the absolute mess. Simply put, it was a disaster. But they all pushed through with the recording sessions and the filming anyways, and in December of 1967, both the film and the accompanying soundtrack and album would release. So I've actually seen Magical Mystery Tour back when I was really in my Beatles stan era and wanted as much Beatle content shoved down my throat as possible. Yeah, I can safely say one of the worst movies I've ever seen. It makes no goddamn sense. And not in a good way either. I usually love confusing campy shit, but this was just so painfully unfunny, and it's completely directionless and plotless. There's this one scene that sticks in my mind where this police guy is just screaming for like 5 minutes in the movie. Like, that's it. The Beatles also barely have scenes together, nor do they interact. There's just one single scene where they're wizards and talk about the bus coming. The only standout of this movie were the music videos, specifically for Fool on the Hill, I Am the Walrus, and Blue Jay Way, and the ending with Your Mother Should Know. It just feels like a bunch of short clips thrown together into one long movie. Like, yes, the budget is pretty big and some of the scenes are visually very stunning to look at, but it's a massive mess at the end of the day. And I mean, they really should have seen this coming with how disorganized they were during the recording sessions and the filming sessions. Even beyond my own personal critiques of the movie, it was a massive critical and commercial failure. It got dragged through the mud by critics and it performed pretty poorly monetarily for their standards. Even viewership both in the US and UK were fairly low. It's the first true time that the Beatles received negative criticisms on a much greater scale with their own work. So it was a pretty major blow. The album, on the other hand, did pretty well. It resembles the band going on an imaginary tour since they can't actually tour in real life. It's literally one of those instances where the movie sucks but the soundtrack still slaps. It is technically called a soundtrack, but I'm just gonna call it an album album for the sake of this video, but it's split up into two parts. The second half is literally just all the singles they released the same year, which were some of their best and most well-known songs ever. The first half of the album comes from the movie. Kicking things off, we have the first 6 songs, starting with the album title Magical Mystery Tour, a very solid way to start off the album. It's just very fun and a bit campy at times. It's almost like an advertisement for an actual tour. I really like The Fool on the Hill, however. It's another campy kind of song with kind of depressing yet silly lyrics. I love the little flute that plays throughout it. It's a cute song. Next up is Flying and Ring the Bells! Ring the bells, everyone! Ring the bells! We have our first ever instrumental piece from the band. This song is actually also very unique because it's the only song to ever credit all 4 of the Beatles. I mean, overall the song is like kind of bland. Blue Jay Way is weird as yet it is unironically one of my favorites from this album. Even one of my favorite George songs too. It's very psychedelic and strange, and the lyrics hardly make sense. But I live. I love Your Mother Should Know. It's just another fun song. It's cheeky. I love the little fun orchestra vibes. I Am the Walrus to date is one of their most experimental songs ever. It took me a while to get into this one. Nowadays, it's definitely a big favorite of mine due to how balls off the walls it is. It's actually John's response to people continuously trying to decipher his lyrics. It's just such an iconic song all around. Then we make our way to side number 2. We've got the 3 singles we previously talked about: Strawberry Fields, Penny Lane, and All You Need Is Love. So I mean, off the bat, this is already a pretty phenomenal album based on these 3 songs alone. But then we have 2 other singles, starting with one of my personal faves, Baby You're a Rich Man. Literally one of the most villain-coded, just insane songs that they've made. I love it. I love songs that trash on rich people, so this gets 2 big fat thumbs up for me. And finally, we have another well-known single, Hello, Goodbye. Definitely another Beatles staple in terms of their most popular, well-known songs. The lyrics are beyond simple, however, and kind of dumb, but I won't lie, it is so catchy. The music video for it is definitely one of my favorites. Paul clearly had the other band members at gunpoint in order to film it. So like I said, while the Magical Mystery Tour movie flopped, the soundtrack did pretty well all around. While it honestly isn't one of my fave albums from their more experimental era, the album has a quality of fun that you honestly can't really find in any of their other more mature work. So I appreciate it for what it is. However, this album is one of those fairly rare instances where the band's creativity did not pay off. So consider the Yellow Submarine era a bit of a side quest, because as iconic of a movie and as integral of a part it plays in the Beatles' career, they really did not play a huge role in the making of the movie and the soundtrack. And to be honest, after Help and Magical Mystery Tour, they really did not want to keep making movies. Yellow Submarine, the movie, would be released in July of 1968, but the soundtrack wouldn't be released until January of 1969 after the Beatles' White Album, which is coming up, so the timeline gets a little bit funky here. For one thing, the movie itself is a really wacky, campy, honestly really beautifully animated film. Lots of colorful elements to it that really show off the vibes and psychedelic avant-garde art that was being produced at the time. Even the actual plot itself is really entertaining and fun. The Beatles use their Yellow Submarine to travel to Pepperland to save save everyone by dressing up as Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and spreading love and music to free everyone. And then the video ends with a cute little cameo from them. They play some of their songs, mostly from their past, and select a few new ones. My favorite is the visuals for Only a Northern Song, Eleanor Rigby, and then the end with All You Need Is Love. Even the interactions that the Beatles have with each other in the movie is incredibly entertaining and wholesome. It's actually crazy how an animated movie with different voice actors was able to capture the dynamics and the relationship of the band better than Help and Magical Mystery Tour could. I'd recommend you watch it if you haven't. Very similarly to Magical Mystery Tour, the accompanying soundtrack would have two parts to it. The first half being songs recorded by the Beatles, and the second half, interestingly enough, would be the orchestral film score composed by none other than the absolutely brilliant George Martin. It's pretty breathtaking if you like instrumental orchestra music. Pepperland is probably the most iconic of the 7 instrumental tracks here, since it's the one that introduces us into the film right away. It's honestly so fucking gorgeous and breathtaking. George Martin did not have to pop off as hard as he did here. I love it a lot. The following song, Sea of Time, actually has some sitar action going on at the beginning, giving the song some life and interesting dynamic. The rest of the songs are fine. I mean, at the end of the day, it is just the orchestral parts of the movie's soundtrack. Then as for the first half of the soundtrack, we've got 2 songs that we know all too well by now. Yellow Submarine, of course, and then All You Need Is Love. And then the rest of the 4 songs are new songs. George Harrison actually has 2 songs under his name here. First one being Only a Northern Song. Very trippy, which is pretty much the norm for their songs by now. To be honest, I'm not a massive fan of this one. I think I need this song to grow on me. The extraness of the background music is kind of jarring for me. Then George's second song, It's All Too Much, is literally that. Literally all too much. It's literally over 6 minutes long, so I was honestly really blown away by how amazing the instrumentals were though. Like, that intro with all the electric guitars was awesome. George's voice gets progressively better as the song goes on, but at the beginning it is pretty jarring, not gonna lie. All Together Now is just fun, lighthearted. It's literally just like a total of 5 sentences repeated like 20 times, but it's fun. For me, the standout was definitely Hey Bulldog. It's so fucking wild and energetic. John puts his all into the vocals here, and the end where he starts going insane and barking like a full-on bulldog is just crazy, but in a good way. So yeah, there's our little side quest, if you will. The Beatles, critics and fans alike, really enjoyed the movie a lot, and for good reason. It's a fun time, it's insanely creative. John even said this was his favorite Beatles film. It's a treasure for sure, and I recommend you all watch the movie and listen to the soundtrack. The White Album fucked everything up. Okay, where do we begin with this one? Before we dive into the mess that is the White Album, quite a few significant events happened before then. John and George were very heavily interested in East Asian culture and meditation, and decided to convince the entire band to go on a 3-month meditation retreat hosted by the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, primarily as a way to find some sort of guidance that they were lacking and to open up their minds creatively as they began working and writing for their next few singles and albums. During the month of February, the band did end up going with all of their respective partners at the time. They were also accompanied by some of their studio workers and roadies, and even some celebrities joined the meditation retreat as well, such as electronics engineer Magic Alex, Mike Love, and Mia Farrow. So this retreat was a pretty big deal. That being said, I can tell you right now that the band did not last all 3 months. months. Poor Ringo only lasted 10 days because he was having a bunch of different health issues with the food and the intense Indian climate. Paul lasted a month growing bored of the retreat. Then things literally take the most severe left turn out of nowhere when Magic Alex accused the Maharishi of sexually assaulting some of the women on the trip, including Mia Farrow, leading to John leaving 2 months later out of protest and taking George and the rest of the gang with him. These accusations pissed the Beatles off greatly. John even made a song, Sexy Sadie, basically ripping into the Maharishi. Paul also released a statement admitting to their mistake of attending the retreat and their lack of research beforehand. Though it may seem like the retreat was a complete and total failure, the band was able to write a shit ton of really great songs that would be on the White Album, including Back in the USSR, Blackbird, Dear Prudence, I'm So Tired, Julia, Revolution. Even Ringo was able to get some writing in with Don't Pass Me By. So I mean, creatively, this retreat did wonders. The band actually had a double-sided single released while they were at the retreat, Lady Madonna and The Inner Light. I've actually never heard of The Inner Light before this, so this is a pretty massive surprise. This is probably the most Eastern Asian song that George has ever Georged throughout his entire career. You know, it's actually really pretty, I have to admit. It wasn't groundbreaking or anything, but it's a very interesting listen, so I recommend if you've never heard it before. Lady Madonna, on the other hand, the lyrics are actually incredibly raunchy, especially for the time period it was released in. I love it a lot though. It's obviously about prostitution and, you know, work. Then in May of 1968, John and Paul would venture into the business world with their multimedia corporation, Apple Corps. It was a way to have all of their entertainment outlets, mainly just their movies and music, to be under their own monetary control. It went as well as you'd think it went. It flopped almost immediately financially. However, somehow, some way, it is still standing to this day, with the owners being Ringo, Paul, some random Japanese artists who we haven't talked about quite yet, and Olivia Harrison. I mean, you can see the Apple logo right there. This is one of their compilation albums. There you go. While it didn't do well at first, I'm pretty sure it's doing much better now. Things do take a bit of a more positive, lighthearted turn as we get another double-sided single. The song Revolution, not to be confused with Revolution 1 or the other one, would be the B-side single. The release was perfect for the time period as political protests were becoming massively worldwide with the Vietnam War raging on. Revolution is quite literally about starting a revolution. Ironically enough though, political radicals actually criticized the song for being too passive. Although, I'm gonna tell you all right now, this is the best version of a revolution song that they made by a mile. And then on the other side of this single, we get the song. You know, considering the turmoil this band has been through for the past 2 years, Hey Jude is a very needed breath of fresh air. I get it, y'all. I really do. The sentiment here is real. Hey Jude is just beautiful. It's a very lovely, nice, uplifting, cute song. Despite it being 7 minutes, it just flies by so smoothly. In terms of their pop songs, this is undoubtedly Paul's best. As for the lyrical content, Paul actually wrote this song for Julian Lennon, John's son at the time, who already was dealing with neglect from his father, but now on top of that would also have to deal with a divorce because John was cheating on Cynthia with that same Japanese artist who we will talk about very soon. But yeah, Cynthia and John separated, so Paul wrote Hey Jude to cheer up Julian, which, damn, that is just so pure. But it really explains the uplifting, comforting nature of the lyrics a lot more. I know it's overplayed to death by now, and far away their most popular song ever. Sometimes people need a song to cheer them up, and Hey Jude is that worldwide song that does that. What a positive way to segue into the absolute f***ing hellhole that is the recording sessions for the White Album.
I don't care
swear to God. The White Album recording sessions were definitely the messiest and most toxic sessions the band has ever had to endure through by far. Deep-seated animosity between the guys began to rise to the surface as John and Paul began to clash a lot more creatively. Paul wrote more pop, positive, innocent songs, while John was much more philosophical, raw, and experimental with his music. So John especially loathed working with Paul. Then on top of that, Paul was also incredibly controlling over George and Ringo, to the point where it got so bad, Ringo actually ended up leaving the band for 2 weeks and went on vacation to Sardinia. You know it's bad if Ringo couldn't even handle it. So when you hear Back in the USSR and Dear Prudence, the first 2 songs on the album, it's actually Paul playing the drums. He did come back though with some convincing from the other 3, and sweetly enough, George Harrison actually decorated his drum kit in flowers as a welcome back gift. One good thing to come out of this mess is the closeness of George and Ringo. But to add even more stress, George would grow progressively more frustrated with being overlooked by John and especially Paul. John was also very passive aggressive and unwilling to cooperate during this time. He was just constantly rejecting Paul's ideas and just giving everyone a hard time, but nothing irritated the band more than John's insistence on having the one, the only Yoko Ono sit in on all of their recording sessions. Yoko Ono, the woman who many blame for breaking up the Beatles. But did she actually do it? Firstly, it's important to talk about her relationship with John and the band. Yoko actually met Paul first while attempting to get a manuscript from him. She met John shortly after in an art gallery in London on November of 1966. She had her own conceptual art exhibit, and John became immediately intrigued with Yoko's avant-garde art and strange style, so they started to spend a lot more time together. But nothing would really transpire right away until one fateful night when Cynthia was away in May of 1968. John invited Yoko to their house, where they spent the entire night recording avant-garde tape loops, which would become John's first solo album and their first collaborative album. Unfinished Music #1, 2 Virgins, you know, very naked. And then after that, well, they f***ed. Cynthia returned the following day and walked in on Yoko Ono wearing her bathrobe and drinking tea with John, to which Yoko simply said, "Oh, hi." Yeah, that's all. Oh, hi. So I mean, obviously they divorced immediately, leading to Hey Jude, and now we're here. John was insistent that Yoko joined in on their recording sessions, which annoyed all 3 band members, especially since it broke their bro code of no girlfriends or wives allowed in the studio. Now, I know that a lot of people blame Yoko for the collapse of the band, but I would arguably say that John seemed to have played the true primary role of doing this, with his insistence of Yoko constantly being at his side and his rejection of cooperating with the band in any capacity. I don't know, I just don't think that Yoko really played as big of a role in the breakup as many people think. So yeah, recording for the White Album was a complete and utter shit show. Paul straight up said that it wasn't a pleasant one to make, and I'm sure all 4 of them honestly would mark this period as the beginning of the end. But through all the trials and all the tribulations, in November of 1968, the White Album would release. Being the first album under Apple Corps with 30 songs exactly, this is an official double album, and it is by far their most diverse when it comes to genres used, ranging from folk, country rock, blues, avant-garde, even the first few examples of metal rock. There is truly some something for everyone here. Some people really love this album, some don't. They were very creative here, let's just say that. The album cover is also purposely a stark contrast to their previous albums to show a bit of maturing has occurred musically for them. This album is massive. I'm obviously not going to be able to go through every single song here, but I'm going to pinpoint a few that really stand out both for better or for worse. So let's get into it. Back in the USSR is an explosive intro with hard rock vibes mixed with Beach Boys style vocals and instrumentals. Obviously, it's a tad bit outdated, but it's phenomenal. Dear Prudence by John is actually about Mia Farrow's sister, Prudence, who often isolated herself during the retreat in India. It's a very pretty song. Honestly, one of my favorites from John. Then there's The Cursed, Obla Di Obla Da by Paul. And yeah, this one is one that really caused the most friction between the band. Both John and George especially hated this song. John even called it granny music shit. It's not even bad in my opinion. Well, it kind of is. It's just very annoying and repetitive, so I mean, it's not a favorite of mine. Wild Honey Pie is nearly a minute of complete chaos and white noise. It's bad. While My Guitar Gently Weeps is one of George's absolute best. He actually got Eric Clapton to play the guitar on this one, and God, it just sounds amazing. It's so beautiful lyrically and musically. George sounds fantastic. He truly was in his bag with this one. I also love Happiness is a Warm Gun, which John wrote about Yoko. Martha My Dear is a fun, cheery Paul song where he shows off his piano skills. It's also about his dog, who, believe it or not, was also named Martha. Blackbird is just phenomenal. It's lyrically so beautiful, so soft and simple, but so effective. Paul wrote this song about the Little Rock 9 incident during the civil rights movement. Beyonce also covered this song in Cowboy Carter. Highly recommend you listen to as well. This is far and away just one of Paul's best songs ever. We've got a Ringo song that I mentioned before, Don't Pass Me By. While I think it's a step down from his work in Sgt. Pepper's, the fact that he wrote this song and sang it in the first place is a pretty big deal. It sounds good. Why Don't We Do It in the Road is by Paul, and the fact that he wrote this song and Blackbird in the same album is honestly a testament to just how much range he has as a writer. Julia. Ooh, Julia. I know I said Dear Prudence was one of John's most beautiful songs, but Julia is by far his most beautiful, haunting, emotional song he's ever composed. It's about his late mother, Julia, and he really pours his soul into it. Everybody's got something to hide except me and my monkey. Even the name itself is so ridiculous. Helter Skelter. I mean, come on now. It's Helter Skelter. One of the earliest examples of metal rock. It goes so hard. Ringo saying I got blisters on my fingers is actually the hardest way to ever end a song. This song is amazing. Actually, there is some very dark lore, as this and another song, Pickies by George Harrison, which serve as an inspiration for cult leader Charles Manson to basically go on a tirade in Los Angeles, resulting in the infamous death of Sharon Tate. He thought both songs had a subliminal message involving hell. It's very weird and f***ed up. But moving on, I actually think Long, Long, Long is a super underrated George Harrison song. Just thought I'd mention it here really quickly. Revolution 1 is the far less superior Revolution. It's literally the same lyrics, but it definitely comes off as more of a rough draft rather than an actual song. Honey Pie is so cute and pure, like the 30s jazz, old Hollywood type vibe. I love it. And then, oh god. Simply Put put, Revolution 9 is the most cursed song they have ever produced. It's really just 8 full-on minutes of white noise. Don't listen to this song. The turmoil really is not worth it. Then Good Night by Ringo ends this entire album. Very interesting choice, but I'll Be So Real. I kind of like this song a lot. It's a very old Hollywood dramatic movie ending vibe. Kind of has a classic Disney sound to it as well. Ringo's voice surprisingly lends itself super well to classical music like this. He chewed with this one, okay? He chewed. But I really like the White Album. Even the songs that were really bad, I can't help but appreciate and respect that they made these songs at all. You know, they were making strides to experiment and be as creative as possible rather than just playing it safe. Overall, it's probably their most ambitious album. I would arguably say it's their most essential listen to get a good grasp of just what the Beatles are all about. It's a fantastically complicated album. Well, it doesn't get much better from here. The timeline with Abbey Road and Let It Be are a bit screwed up since Let It Be is their final album released, but Abbey Road was the last album they actually recorded, so we're gonna be doing some jumping back and forth here. The toxicity and the tensions that sprouted from the White Album still lingered on well into 1969. The status of the band as a whole was heavily put into question as all 4 of the guys started to venture off into their own solo projects. George was collaborating a lot on his own with other artists like Bob Dylan and especially Eric Clapton, and felt stifled by staying in the band in which he hardly had any creative control of his own. John and Yoko were beginning to make their own music, including the famous Give Peace a Chance. Even Ringo was exploring acting during this time as he was filming for a movie called The Magic Christian. Paul was really the only one making active strides to keep the band together, which brings us to the Get Back project, an attempt for the band to go back to their roots and record a live album like they did with their earlier projects. So this is actually technically the recording sessions for Let It Be, as a majority, if not all of the songs recorded here would be on its final album. But in short, this was Paul's way of getting the band back into good spirits, on the same page, stronger than ever. So along with recording the album, the sessions were also getting filmed for a documentary. They were preparing for some kind of comeback live performance, all of which you can actually watch in Peter Jackson's Get Back television series. Incredibly interesting to see the Beatles at work through a modern lens. It's a great documentary, so I highly suggest you go watch it if you can. Once they start recording in Abbey Road Studios, things get a lot better for them because they also have Billy Preston on the keyboard, who is constantly referred to as an honorary 5th Beatle. He brought up their spirits as well. It's really just a very wholesome time and beautiful moment for them. For those who do not know, they end up performing on a roof in January of 1969. Very legendary stuff. They do still have to deal with a bunch of shit beforehand though. George, John, and Paul's disagreements are at their absolute worst here. Paul and George clash like crazy. Paul and John also tend to mess around a lot and really just continue to brush George and his ideas off to the side, leading to George leaving the band in the most casual, nonchalant way possible.
I think I'll be leaving the band now. When? Now.
The next day, neither John nor George show up, and there's this really impactful shot of a teary-eyed Paul McCartney. You really just feel for him, trying to keep everyone together and having it all go terribly wrong.
And then there were 2.
Pretty emotional, honestly, especially when you realize his whole life has really been revolving around this band. But they do find a way to get George back into the studio. Something that the documentary slightly hinted at, but didn't entirely show, were the managerial problems that the band would face right after the Get Back sessions. Obviously, the band was still horribly mismanaged despite Paul's efforts to try and take the role himself, so they needed to find a manager as soon as possible. John and Yoko found Alan Klein, who managed the Rolling Stones, but then Paul met Linda Eastman, literally mother, vegetarian queen, and photographer. She was a pretty big presence in the Get Back docuseries, where at the time she was Paul's girlfriend. She really is just such a calming presence. It's very clear why Paul loves her. The guys also really like her too. Paul would go on to marry her in March of 1969, then also bringing in Lee and John Eastman, the father and brother of Linda, into the Beatles' business, both of them serving as lawyers for the band, which would only further increase tensions as both the Eastmans and Klein himself would want a managerial position. Both sides on top of that would give conflicting business and financial advice to the band, which only caused even more divisions in the group as John, George, and Ringo preferred Alan Klein, while Paul would obviously vouch for the Eastmans as primary managers. Being outnumbered though, Alan Klein would get complete managerial control of the band, which went as well as you'd expect considering the band would fall apart just a year later. Okay, so things are really not great right now. The band is about to collapse, and while the rooftop performance was a success, the Get Back project was promptly put on hold, especially as all the band members started to slowly drift apart into their own solo projects. With one final push, Paul brought up making one more album with George Martin, one that would bring back the fun, the love, the organization and discipline of the older days. And with George Martin's blessing and the rest of the band's agreement, Abbey Road, the technical final album, was recorded from February to August of 1969 and released in September of that same year. It wasn't outwardly stated by any of the band members that this would be the final recording sessions, but it seemed that most of the band silently felt like it was that. George even said, and I quote, "It felt as if we were reaching the end of the line." So the vibe was pretty final with the recording of Abbey Road. But having said that, the recording sessions for this album were actually incredibly harmonious and peaceful, and the band genuinely had fun recording everything for the first time in what seemed like ages. Even if John hated most of Paul's work here still and despised the medley in the second half of the album, the vibes were incredibly positive and immaculate. I would arguably say Abbey Road is probably the most iconic album of all time, mainly due to the cover of them walking the now incredibly famous crosswalk in front of Abbey Road Studios. But let's see if Abbey Road really does walk the walk. We do actually have two singles here, The Ballad of John and Yoko and Old Brown Shoe. The Ballad of John and Yoko is fun. I mean, I've only just now started listening to it, and it's pretty simple and decent. I mean, fun lyrics, upbeat tempo, it's all right. Old Brown Shoe, it's a fun George song, very country, but it really isn't one I'd find myself going back to either. Both of these songs are kind of just songs that get lost in the vast pool of Beatles singles. Then we jump into the ever so iconic Abbey Road, split into two sides, the first being the singles and the second being an entire medley. It all starts with Come Together, and let me just say, my earliest memories of listening to the Beatles was hearing the song play constantly on my mom's car radio. Come Together is just cool. It's so badass. Lots of sexual innuendos. John's vocals are phenomenal here. Paul as the backing vocals adds such a coolness to the song. Great way to start the album. Something is one of my favorite Beatles songs of all time, and my favorite George song, Point Blank. Coined as the greatest love song of all time by Frank Sinatra himself, this song is so incredibly beautifully written. It is so beyond romantic. George's writing in the band just peaks here. His voice is so gentle and alluring. The subtle hints of strings playing in the background is just so stunning. Everyone say thank you to George Harrison right now. Not even kidding. Everyone in the band except Paul hates Maxwell Silverhammer, which is completely unwarranted. Maxwell Silverhammer is a bop, and I'm not afraid to say it. I think it's charming. I love the little clangs. It's a silly little pop song. I enjoy it enough. Oh Darling is a lovely ballad from Paul, showing off his really overlooked vocals and going to town with this one. Octopus's Garden is Ringo's magnum opus. I'm not even gonna argue with this. Octopus's Garden is a really beautiful song, actually, especially when you hear how it got written in the first place. During his time in Sardinia, while he temporarily quit the Beatles, when he was feeling especially tired of the band's constant bickering and hostility, thus him needing to escape to an Octopus's Garden away from all the noise and trouble. It is just so beyond pure, so quintessential Ringo in the best way possible. This is Ringo's best song, arguably of his entire career. Things take a drastic turn as we head right into the darkness and despair that is I Want You, She's So Heavy. Nearly 8 minutes of pure despair and depression. One of their most intense and, dare I say, heaviest songs. It's absolutely incredible. I mean, they just repeat the same lyrics throughout the song over and over again, but what really gives I Want You, She's So Heavy its edge is the song that directly precedes after it. Going from absolutely intense and heavy, then abruptly changing to lighthearted and soft. The transition between I Want You, She's So Heavy and Here Comes the Sun is absolutely mesmerizing. But yes, we are now at the George Harrison song, the big 1 billion streamer on Spotify, Here Comes the Sun. The amount of quirky ukulele covers of this damn song that you will find on YouTube, uncanny. It's a beautiful song that George wrote in his garden with Eric Clapton, quite literally after several rainy days, but there's obviously a much deeper meaning here with starting a new chapter in life, finding lightness after the darkness. It's one of the most positive, uplifting songs of all time without really trying to do so. As overhyped and as popular as it may be, I think it truly deserves it. Phenomenal song by George. Time to tackle this absolutely dreadful medley. Literally, it's anything but dreadful. John completely hated the medley for a while and even called Abbey Road one of his least favorite albums they've ever done. But we are not John Lennon now, are we? The medley starts with the harmonious because the harmonies here are lethal and so stunning, yet it does feel slightly out of place here. You Never Give Me Your Money really kicks things off though, and boy does it kick us off. Very fun song, honestly a must listen to from the medley. Things smoothly transition into The Sun King, another song with some bomb ass harmonies, even some Spanish thrown in there. Things get shaken up violently with the next 3 songs that all kind of blend into each other. Me and Mr. Mustard, Polythene Pam, and She Came In Through the Bathroom Window. This could have been one song, honestly. I'm not a huge fan of Mean Mr. Mustard or Polythene Pan, but I do really like She Came In Through the Bathroom Window. John and Paul's harmonies here are great yet again, and the lyrics are fun and cheeky. Then there's the 3 final songs that conclude the medley. Golden Slumbers, Carry That Weight, and The End are 3 of the most emotional, mesmerizing, beautiful pieces of art. You really feel like it's the end here with these 3, and it makes the listening experience so gut-wrenching. To this day, I feel a deep pit in my stomach listening to these songs. It is the conclusion of one of the greatest careers the music world has ever seen, and they end it all on the greatest high note they could have possibly ended it on. Golden Slumbers is Paul's vocals at his absolute best. The lyrics are so soft and gentle, title is a gorgeous song. It's immediately followed up by Carry That Weight. Hearing the guys all singing Carry That Weight will tug at your heartstrings for sure. And that trumpet and orchestra part at the end is insane. It gets me choked up. And then it all ends with, well, the end. Truly, there could not have been a better way to end not only this album, but the band as a whole. It's really just instrumentals with some vocals here and there. But I mean, Ringo in particular puts so much soul into the drums. John, Paul, and George rock it with the guitars per usual. There is just so much raw soul and emotion in their playing here. And it really feels like the end of an epic movie series or something. And Paul's quote at the end will always resonate with me. And in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make. This right here is why Abbey Road is as impactful as it is. Babes, this is music. Also, there's Her Majesty, but who the f cares?
When I find myself in times of trouble, Mother
Despite the good vibes that Abbey Road gave us, it unfortunately was not enough to hold the band together. In September of 1969, John, Paul, and George met up to discuss the possibility of finishing the unfinished Get Back project. It went as well as you think. George and John expressed frustrations with Paul for limiting their creativity. John tried demolishing the Lennon-McCartney writing partnership. Paul rejected this. They began to finish up the album anyways though. But then in September of 1969, John Lennon officially decided to leave the band to pursue his other ambitions with the Plastic Ono Band, making him the first Beatle to quit. January of 1970, Paul, George, and Ringo would record George's song, I'm a Mine, the last song that they would ever record together. There was a bit of uncertainty as to what the status of the band was still. The rest of the bandmates thought John would come back, so for like 4 months, the band was in complete limbo. However, on April 10th of 1970, Paul McCartney publicly ended things when he announced his departure from the band a week before he released his first solo album, the self-titled McCartney, which definitely did not look good, with George, John, and the public especially pretty much turning on him and becoming very hostile towards him. John would even write a scathing diss track about Paul about a year later titled How Do You Sleep, and it is brutal. Point here being that the band was officially dead in the water come the new decade. George Martin, along with Paul, still made a final push to finish the final album, also getting producer Phil Spector in on the recordings. He actually infamously ruined most of the songs here with his incredibly extra method of composing music. The most famous or most infamous being his composition of The Long and Winding Road, where he literally drowns Paul's beautiful vocals using the loudest, most obnoxious choir of all time. Paul was very unhappy, needless to say, with Phil's work on the album. Nothing was done, and the album was released just 1 month after the official public breakup. You guys can actually listen to the stripped down versions of Let It Be with the remixed album Let It Be Naked, which is honestly much better than the OG, which we'll get into, though I will admit Phil Spector's work on Across the Universe actually fits incredibly well. But that being said, this is an incredibly underwhelming final album, accompanied by an even more underwhelming documentary. Let It Be, the documentary, was critically and commercially panned by the public and critics alike. I've never seen it, so I can't really speak much on it, but apparently it just made no sense and was completely messy. I will say though, it actually won the band an Oscar because the song itself, Let It Be. But yes, Let It Be, the album, is often considered a disappointment between critics and fans alike, especially when you think about how this is the final album. Like, Abbey Road is by far the more definitive end, but Let It Be is the one they end things on. It just feels very wrong. There are great songs here, do not get me wrong, primarily the singles, but other than that, it does feel pretty soulless and empty, only making the breakup even tougher to swallow. It's kind of depressing, honestly. 12 songs in total, and one more single to talk about. We've first got Don't Let Me Down, which was released with Get Back way back in 1969. I absolutely love Don't Let Me Down. I love the blues, classic rock sounds to it. John sounds great. His harmonies with Paul are fantastic. Nothing much more to say. I just really love this song. Then getting into the actual album, things kick off with a very wholesome Two of Us, a duet between Paul and John. And while Paul actually wrote it about his travels with Linda, it's become a bit of a friendship anthem, especially with Paul and John being the ones to sing it. It is a cute little road trip campfire song with sweet lyrics, simple guitar things. It's cute, I like it. Dig a Pony makes no sense at all, but I also enjoy it. You know, when it comes on my playlist, I won't skip it. Across the Universe quite literally teleports us to a whole new realm of sound and lyricism. Like, this song has no business being on this damn album because holy shit is it absolutely otherworldly and amazing. As I said before, I actually think Phil Spector's composition works so well here. It's one of John's greatest achievements ever for sure. Truly one of, honestly, my favorite John song. I'm in Mind by George is another simple yet really good one. This one actually holds a lot of sentiment for me. Technically, this song really sparked my love for the Beatles. It's basically about egoism, specifically in the band. It's just so simple but so effective. I really love this song a lot. Dig It sucks. I'm sorry. It's just 50 seconds of John yelling. Then we get to Let It Be, yet another all-time Beatles classic, up there next to songs like Hey Jude and Here Comes the Sun. Definitely has that same uplifting spirit as well. In my opinion, this might honestly be Paul's magnum opus. It's quite literally about a dream he had where his mother, Mary, visited him saying the phrase, "Let it be." It has just such an optimistic yet deep and personal meaning to it. Again, similar to Across the Universe, this song was way too good to be on this damn album. Maggie May is actually a traditional Liverpool folk song originally, about a prostitute who robbed a sailor. If you can't tell, the Beatles really love singing about prostitutes. I've got a feeling it's great. Really fun and clever lyrics about wet dreams and just having a good time in general. There's a really great live performance of Paul singing this with a video of John during his Get Back tour, which was incredibly wholesome. One After 909 is very rockabilly, definitely brings me back to their Quarrymen days. It's fun, not a super big favorite of mine. I struggle a bit with the long and winding road, mainly because of Phil Spector. This on its own is such a beautiful song when it's stripped back and it's just Paul. It's incredibly emotional, such a fitting song during a time of breakups and career ends. The choir is a lot, but still, Paul's vocals and piano skills really make up for it, I think. So I still think this song is pretty good. For You Blue by George is really cute. I don't really know how else to put it, but it's a nice little song. Then we get to the final song that we will be talking about, which is crazy to say, but it's Get Back. It's a really fun song though in general. The lyrics are catchy and honestly I love John's little speech at the end where he's like, "We hope we pass the audition." So fun, honestly, and a really cute, cheeky way to end their final album. I cannot believe we're here at the end though. Ooh, so crazy. From the Quarrymen to Please Please Me to Sgt. Pepper's to the streets of Abbey Road, we have truly covered it all. You're all probably wondering if things turn out much better for the band after their breakup, and well, honestly, not really. Before John's assassination, the band actually never fully reunited. Only one time did they do so after John's death with George, Paul, and Ringo to record the anthology series. Even directly after the breakup, the first half of the 70s were unkind to the band's friendships, except for Ringo, of course, even being the only one to feature all of the other members on a single album with his self-titled Ringo in 1973. But George and John pretty much despised Paul afterwards, especially how he went about announcing the public breakup of the band. John and Paul wrote songs dissing each other quite a bit, and of course took to the media to trash each other. George would have issues with his marriage to Patty, with Eric Clapton literally stealing her away from him too. There would be many issues, of course, but I think things sort of turned out okay in the later half of the 70s. Paul had a very successful career with his next band, Wings. John and George were pretty successful with their solo careers as well. Even Ringo had a pretty good amount of success afterwards with his solo career. However, his most notable would have to be him narrating for Thomas the Train. Paul and John would reconnect though, fortunately, and become really close again until John was assassinated in December of 1980. And in 2001, George would then die to cancer tragically, leaving just Ringo and Paul as the two surviving members of the band at this very moment. Kind of a bit depressing, honestly, but they've both been killing it and are still regarded as music legends. All that's been said here has probably been said a million times. The Beatles changed popular music forever. Many of the recording practices that singers use today were headed by the Beatles and those who worked with them. So many of their songs are instant classics that are known worldwide. It was just really lovely and very fun to go through their entire historic career like this. Goodbye.